All right. It's all yours, Mary Jane.
Great, great. Well, thank you, Amanda. Um, this is the first time I've ever done one like this. I've been on conference calls and stuff, but I've never done a presentation this way, so it's a new experience for me. I thought what I'd do is I thought I would start by kind of talking for maybe five or so minutes about the budget process in New Hampshire, and then pause at that point and have, if people have questions about the process, and we can, discuss what happens all the way along the line. But I thought maybe that would be a good way to get started for people who aren't familiar with it, because it is a long process, as you'll see after I talk for a few minutes. So the budget process in New Hampshire, we have a 2-year budget. And the process actually for the year for the 2021 budget actually started last summer, in the summer of 2018, as all of the departments, state departments, began the preparation for their budgets. They work all through the summer and into the early fall preparing their budgets. And then in the fall, they present their budget request to the governor. By about November, so around Thanksgiving time, the budgets from the departments have been presented to the governor. He has given them specific instructions about how he or she wants the budget presented. And so this year, Governor Sununu asked that the budget be presented first as an efficiency budget, which was only allowed to be 1 to 1.5% larger than the budget from the last biennium. So a very, very tight budget. It's an efficiency budget, no new programs, just doing government just the way we do it. Just nothing new, nothing extra. And then he also asked them to prepare their priorities. And so every department prepared what it would cost them to run their programs just the way they were for the past 2 years. And then they had a list, each department had a list of priorities, things that they thought they needed to add to make their operation work more smoothly. Maybe it was starting new programs. Maybe they had the opportunity to receive some federal money, but they needed some state match money for a new program. Maybe they needed new positions. So those would go in their priority budget. After they've presented that to the governor in November, it then is the governor's stage to put the budget together. And the governor has a budget director who begins work on the budget in November and works through until February on preparing the governor's budget. And on February 15th, and this is actually in law, on February 15th, by February 15th, the governor has to present his budget to the legislature. And he did this year. On February 15th, we received the budget. Except that the budget actually comes to us in 2 pieces. There's House Bill 1, which is all the numbers, and that is about 1,300 pages long. And it's just pages and pages of numbers and everything that we will need, all the money that we'll need to operate government. And then House Bill 2 is a separate document that comes to us that has all the policies that make House Bill 1 work. So if the governor decided in House Bill 1 that he wanted to add a new program at Health and Human Services, he would put the dollars in House Bill 1, but he would put the description of the program in House Bill 2. So they really go hand in hand. House Bill 1 cannot really work without House Bill 2, and House Bill 2 is not a standalone bill. It has to accompany House Bill 1. And this happened because years and years ago, the budget had something called footnotes in it. And the budget became quite large, and many lines in the budget had footnotes that went with it. And there were objections to budgeting that way. And so it was split into House Bill 1, House Bill 2. House Bill 2 is often called the trailer bill. The only problem with House Bill 2 is that there's no law saying when we receive House Bill 2. So we have to receive all the budget bill, House Bill 1, by February 15th. But House Bill 2 doesn't come along until often several weeks later. And this has been true for many governors. They don't have House Bill 2 ready at the time that they give us House Bill 1. So it's very hard for the House to get working on the budget until they've got House Bill 2. And this year we waited 2 weeks until we did receive it. So it slows us down in our ability to really start working on the budget. The House Finance Committee, which is made up of 22 state representatives, begin work on the budget on February 15th when they receive it from the governor. And we worked on it until April 3rd, which was the day that we voted out of our committee for a recommendation to the full House. And then on April 11th, the full House voted on the budget bill, and the budget did pass the House. It then is now in the Senate, and on actually Monday of this week was the first day the Senate started working on the budget bill. And many of us from the House Finance Committee went over and talked to the Senate about the budget bill that we had just passed, what was in there, what kinds of things they should be looking at, what the revenues were, and just had a discussion and explained to them a lot of the things that we had done. The Senate will have the budget until June 6th. And at that point, the Senate will bring their budget, the budget, to the floor. After that, Senate will get together, and the House will take a look at what the Senate does. The Senate will make changes to the budget, just like the House made changes to the governor's budget. The Senate will make changes to the budget. They may change some things that the governor did that the House didn't change, or they may change things that the House put into the budget. We'll take a look and we'll decide whether or not we think the changes are changes that the House does not feel they can be in agreement with. And if we're not in agreement with the Senate about the budget, then we will ask for a committee of conference. And what a committee of conference is when there's a House bill and the Senate has made changes to it. The House and the Senate then get together to try to work out a compromise, something that they can come to agreement about. So I'll just to give you a couple of quick facts. I just looked this up myself. So the House, we made 297 changes to the governor's budget as we worked on it. And then we also made 35 changes that were requested by the budget writers, by the governor's budget writers. Things that, when you have a 1,300-page document, and then you've got another whole bill that was another 300 to 400 pages, you're going to have things that get dropped, get put in twice. I mean, there were all sorts of little things that happened. So altogether, we had over 300 changes in the governor's budget, and the Senate will have the same situation. They will make changes to the budget, and then the House and the Senate will come together, have probably, more than likely, have a committee of conference, but maybe not. Maybe the House can agree with the Senate changes, and then bring the budget back to both the House and the Senate on the agreed upon budget. And then, as we all know, it goes to the governor, and the governor can either sign the bill, and that's what would be our greatest hope, is that he would sign it, or he could have it become law without his signature, or he could veto it. And if he vetoes it, we would have something called a continuing resolution. And basically what that is we would come to agreement. Usually a continuing resolution means that government will run with the same budget that it has in this biennium. Nothing new, just basically your efficiency budget. It would just run the way government runs in the previous biennium. And the House and the Senate and the governor would work to try to come up with a compromise and then bring the House and Senate back together to vote on a new budget. And hopefully it would be something that a governor could approve of. So that's sort of the process very quickly. And why don't I pause here, and if people have questions, I could take some questions and we can talk about the actual budget and some of the goals we had in the budget. So Amanda, I don't know what to do from here. I don't know how to.
You don't have to worry about it. Everyone is
Okay.
unmuted. If you have a question, feel free to ask.
Well, thank you very much for explaining the process to us. I'm very unfamiliar with the process, so thank you.
I know I went through it pretty fast, and there's a lot of steps along the way, but that was pretty much a pretty brief summary of what the process is. And as you can see, it's a long process because it started last summer and it won't end until June 30th.
Maybe could you elaborate on the budget being passed without the governor's signature?
Well, just like any other bill, the governor can either sign a bill or he can let it become law without his signature. That basically says, I don't like this, but it's not, I don't object so much that I'm not going to let it become law, or then he can veto it. And there are a number, basically House Bill 1 and House Bill 2 go through the same process as any other bill, as far as going to committee of conference, going to the governor for a veto or for his signature, or for him to let it become law without a signature. So, and he does that. I mean, I think we have quite a few bills that he will there'll be a number of bills that will pass the House and the Senate that the governor will not sign, but he won't veto them either. So he's not giving it support, but he doesn't object enough to veto it. You want me to talk a little bit? Okay, go on.
I want to, because I think it's interesting process to be able to get the budget passed without the governor's signature. Can you, in your history with the House, do you recall any other scenarios like similar?
Remember, that really is a good question, and I should be able to remember, but I mean, I've been on the budget committee for probably 26 years now, and it seems like we've been through every imaginable kind of budget. Do I remember one where the governor did not sign? I can't right off the top of my head, Amanda, remember one, but I'm sure it's happened at some point in the last. I've been there for a number of vetoes and have seen how we've had to work through that situation.
Can you maybe share that example of what you do when that happens? Sure. And how long it might take, or compromises that have to be made?
Right. Yeah. Well, the last two that I was on the House Finance Committee for was Governor Benson vetoed a budget, and we worked after he vetoed it. We had a continuing resolution, so the state did not shut down. We continued spending at the previous biennium levels. No new programs started, no new employees were hired, nothing new happened, no changes in the way government was running. But during the summer, there was a committee. I think there were like 5 senators and 5 House members, or 7 or 8 House members. And we met with the governor during the summer and till we could come up with a compromise. That was an interesting one because actually a lot of people think that the governor actually did, he actually ended up getting less after the compromise than if he had just taken the budget the way it was presented to him in June of that year. So that the House and the Senate actually did better in that negotiation than the governor did. The next one that I worked on was Maggie Hassan vetoed a budget, and the main reason that she vetoed the budget was because there was no any sort of new compensation for state employees. There was no pay raise for the state employees included in the budget, and she felt that there needed to be. The Republicans at the same time were really wanting to reduce the business taxes. So the compromise was, during the summer we worked on a compromise, and the compromise was that the state employees did get their pay raise, and there were some business tax reductions. And we came back in the fall of that year and voted on the budget. So those are the 2 most recent ones that I remember, how they worked out.
Terrific. Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions before we move on?
Yeah, I had one. So if the governor vetoes the budget, does he or she tell why? I mean, you said
Yes.
why Maggie Hassan did. So you're not in the dark about why the
Yes.
was vetoed.
Yes, any time a governor vetoes any piece of legislation, they will write a veto message. So you will know what their thinking was behind their veto. So that's fairly common. That always happens. The governor will write a veto message. So we would know. You might not know every single reason. There might be a variety of reasons, but like when Governor Hassan vetoed that budget, she was very specific because of the state employee pay raise wasn't included. So we knew that was something that we were going to be working on. I'm trying to remember why Benson. I can't quite remember why Governor Benson vetoed. He might have wanted just reduced spending, or I can't remember exactly what it was. But yes, we will be told what if there was a veto, he would be told. And the governor tells on any veto why he or she is vetoing the bill. Any more questions? No.
Oh, no.
Okay, so do you want me to talk a little bit about this year's budget and the process we went through?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think this is called I hope this is the Lee Democrats, right? Is that who I'm talking to? The Lee
That
Democrats?
is what you're talking about. Yes, Lee Dems. But keep in mind, it is being recorded.
Okay.
So.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Okay. So this is okay. The House Democratic Caucus gathered together. Amanda, I'm sure, was there, and we gathered in, I think it was late January, maybe mid to late January, early February, and set out our priorities for for this 2-year session. And so the priorities that the goals that the caucus had were the first, and the one that really received the most, we did a voting system, but it did receive the most votes, was school funding. The next one was property tax relief. I think the next one was family medical leave, mental health, and then the Division of Children, Youth, and Families, child protection issues. So those were sort of the main agenda items for the House Democrats this year, and as they looked at all their legislation, not just the budget. But we on the budget committee really felt like we wanted to take our direction for what the Democratic caucus wanted us to do in a budget. So we used that agenda and the goals of the Democratic caucus as sort of our guide for as we worked on the budget. The House Finance Committee has 22 people on it. 13 of them are Democrats, 9 are Republicans. I think Amanda said something earlier about we work by divisions. So we have 3 divisions, and each division had 8 people on it, and the division, I mean, yeah, eight people on each division, and the divisions work on separate parts of the budget. So Division 1 basically does they do everything from corrections to cultural affairs to the judiciary, the governor's office, the legislative branch. They do just all of general government. They go through the budget for all of general government. Division 2 actually does kind of a strange mix of education, transportation, safety, police standards and training, and fish and game. And then Division 3 does all of the health and human service budget. And the divisions actually go through the budget pretty much page by page for each of their division charges. So like I said before, the budget is about 1,300 pages. So the divisions is really going through about 400 pages of budget items that they review. They bring in all the departments to talk about the budgets. They talk about any sort of new initiatives, any sort of hiring of new staff. We looked at all the things that the governor laid out, or that the departments laid out to the governor, all their priorities, and made a number of choices from those things. Some of you might have read about the governor's. We would start the year, ending the biennium with a surplus. We've had a very, very good biennium. The revenues have come in very strong. So there is a surplus at the end of the biennium. The governor, as you might have read in the newspaper, his choice was to take all the surplus and spend it now, in this year. So spend it on all kinds of projects. He called them one-time projects. I would probably disagree with him about some of them, because some of them were not one-time projects. They might have built a building, but pretty soon you're going to have to staff it. You're going to have to be sure that out into time, you're going to have to support that building, and the staff that are in that building. So his idea was to do these one-time projects and basically spin down all the surplus. So when the finance committee came together, we made a different decision. We decided, rather than to spin down all the surplus, we would bring the surplus into the new year. We would roll the surplus forward, and we would start the new biennium with the surplus. And then we would decide, partially from his list of special projects, but also from the things that we heard from the department heads and the public hearing about what was needed in the budget. So we took the surplus and used it to develop the budget for the new biennium. And so there was a lot of debate about whether people thought that was the good idea. The governor the governor was very unhappy that we used the surplus in that way. But we felt the surplus should be really dedicated and used for state projects and not just special one-time projects, but projects that were going to benefit everyone in the state. So, like I said, some of the things that we did. I'll give you a few facts about the budget that we developed. The budget is the budget that passed the House budget is $12.9 billion from all funds. And that includes $5.5 billion in general funds and education trust fund funds. So that other, you're saying, well, where is that other, what is that other $7 billion? If the budget is a total of almost 13 billion and only 5.5 is of general funds and education trust fund, where does the rest of that money come from? Well, it comes from the highway fund, the turnpike fund, fish and game fund, and the biggest amount of money is the federal government. We probably receive about $5 billion in the biennium from the federal government, because many of the programs that we operate, such as Medicaid, which is one of our largest programs, child protection, foster care, all the social service kinds of programs, are usually a 50-50 match with the federal government. So we end up receiving billions, not millions, billions of dollars from the federal government. One thing that the governor had done in his budget was he had decided that he would do away with the education trust fund, and he would roll in all the education money into the general fund. The Finance Committee made a decision at the beginning that we did not want to do that. We wanted to keep them separate. We wanted to keep the general fund and the education trust fund separate. We felt that it was very important for both legislators and for the public to be able to see how much we are spending on education, and that education be sectioned off and have a very specific fund of its own with its own accounting, and it not be sort of mushed in with everything else. So, so we have, in our budget, we do have it separate. The governor had put it all together. We separated education funding back out so that we could see what we're spending for education. We also, at the end of the biennium, our budget will have $116.7 million in the rainy day fund. We were able to add to the, right now the rainy day fund has about 110 million. And we were able to, after our budget was completed, we were able to have 6.7 million to add to the rainy day fund. And the rainy day fund is just exactly that. It's just like what you have at home. You have a savings account for a rainy day, and this is a state savings account for a rainy day. And I guess you could probably see that proportionate to the size of the budget, it's really it's still fairly modest amount of money. If the budget is they're almost $13 billion for a 2-year cycle, and we have 116 in savings, it's not proportionately very much. But if there was a rainy day, and we've been through some, it's important to have something there in case something we have some catastrophe that we need to deal with. So our budget this year, I will talk a little bit about the revenue side, and I'll talk a little bit about the spending side. So on the revenue side, the House Ways and Means Committee develops all of the revenue estimates. So the House Ways and Means Committee, while we're spending the money, they're generating the money through taxes and fees and all the ways that the state has of producing income. So the House Ways and Means did the estimates, and those estimates are in our budget. The House Ways and Means estimates were lower than the governor's estimates. So it started us right out spending, looking at reduced revenues. But a couple of actions were taken by the House that changed that picture. And the first was that the business profits tax and the business enterprise tax were scheduled to, again, the rate was going to be reduced on January 1st of 2019. The House voted to freeze the rate at the December 31st, 2018 rate. So the business taxes did not drop. So that meant that we were able to retain some revenue that had been estimated that we would have lost. So that was the first piece of good news for the Finance Committee. And then the second thing that happened was that the Democratic caucus voted, and I don't believe we had any Republicans, I can't remember for sure, but the Democratic caucus did vote to extend the interest and dividends tax to capital gains. And that was all dedicated to the Education Trust Fund so that we could increase funding for our schools. There was also a small amount of revenue that came forth in the governor's budget, actually, to tax e-cigarettes. And then in the governor's budget, there was also new revenue for sports wagering in New Hampshire. So that was some of the revenue some of the new revenue that we saw for the budget. And again, remember what our goals were. Our goals were school funding, that was the first, property tax relief, family medical leave, mental health, and Division of Children, Youth, and Families. So like I said, we retained the Education Trust Fund as a dedicated fund for education. We established a family and medical leave insurance program consistent with the House's position. And that's important because the governor had, in the budget, he had a program that he was promoting. And the House voted on House Bill 712, which is a family medical leave, that pretty similar to what the House had passed last year, very similar to a bill that had passed in the Senate, and it passed the House. So when we got the budget, we removed the governor's program and we put in instead the bill that had passed the House, and it had House support, House and Senate support, because it's very similar to the Senate bill. We also, for the first time in about 12 years, I think it is, we have restored, and we're going to start revenue sharing with communities again. Like you heard before, our revenue was limited in how much we had to spend, but we are going to start revenue sharing up again. So we put $12.5 million into revenue sharing, and I'm hoping that the Senate will add to that, and that there will be more money coming back to cities and towns for revenue sharing. So if you remember, I talked about the governor using the funding, the surplus funds, for one-time projects. Well, a lot of those one-time projects were in communities, and I'm sure for communities, I'm sure they were very important, and there were some really good projects there. They were not state projects, though. Most of them were local projects. Only 29 towns were on the list to get a project. And we thought it would be better if we had a way of getting revenue back to every town, so the towns could make their own decisions about how they wanted to spend that money, whether it was on a project or reducing property tax. So we went the way of revenue sharing. And so every town in the state and under our plan, would get some revenue sharing money. It'll be small to start with, but we're hoping that it'll be a program that will come back and that will, over time, we'll be able to give more monies to cities and towns. In the governor's budget, one of the surprising things that he did was he reduced the appropriation for legal services. This is for people who cannot afford a lawyer. He reduced it by close to $2 million. So one of the very first things we did was we did replace that funding back to legal services. We had almost $6 million for state water aid grants for communities. Again, this is a way for us. We wanted to get money. We were trying to get money as much as we could back to cities and towns. That was one of our real goals, was to help keep property tax down. When we got the budget, something was very surprising to me, because I've spent years on the budget committee, but have always spent my time on the Health and Human Service division, and have not had worked that much with the transportation part of the budget. We were very surprised to find out that the way we received the budget from the governor, the highway fund would have been $15 million in deficit at the end of the biennium. So one of the very first things we had to do was we needed to fill that hole. We needed to find $15 million so that we wouldn't have a highway fund that was in deficit at the end of the biennium. We also realized that we have underfunded transportation for so long. Their trucks, their equipment is falling apart. I don't know if any of you have ever seen some of their equipment is in very bad condition. So we have spent $27 million. Our budget adds $27 million to the transportation budget for the needs of taking care of our highways. Every year, they seem to run out of salt and sand money because they don't have enough. We underfund them, and they need additional salt and sand money. So they come back in for additional appropriations. So we felt that was really important to be sure that we had some resources, and we got some resources to the Department of Transportation. Because we had passed the capital gains tax, as I talked about, we were able to provide $160 million additional dollars to our school districts in our adequacy grants. And we are now, we are going to, with our plan, we would also be funding full day kindergarten, which at this point we were still only funding at a half day level. And we would be restoring stabilization grants in the first year of the biennium, and then in the second year, our new adequacy formula would kick in. And our adequacy formula really looks very closely at the number of free and reduced lunch eligible children there are in a district, property values in a district, and we're trying to get money targeted back out to the lowest income and the schools that are really struggling. We had public testimony from a number of schools that have really struggled with being able to afford to provide the services to their children that they need to. We are putting in $19.3 million over the biennium for new school building aid projects. We're putting in $9 million in special ed funding, and this is an additional funding, and this will bring us up to 100%. We will be fully funding the special ed formula. We're providing $20 million to the community college system and $12 million to the University of New Hampshire. So those are our education goals that the caucus had told us they were very, very interested in. We also put in $10.5 million into the 10-year mental health plan. The caucus also felt that the mental health was something that they were very concerned about, and so we did put in $10.5 million towards the 10-year mental health plan. We put an additional $20 million into the developmental disabilities wait list, and we provided a 2.5% increase for providers in that area. We did it at several other types of mental health programs that we funded. We're funding right now. There are children that are housed, children in the adult psychiatric hospital. A floor of the adult psychiatric hospital is used for children. We are providing funding to find a facility that would better serve those children, and it could be used. It could renovate a facility that could be more child appropriate. Once the children move, we would take the unit they've been in and be able to increase the number of adult beds at the state hospital. One thing that we learned while we were working with the people from the state hospital, the administrators there, was that there are a number of people who are in the hospital, have been in New Hampshire State Hospital, mental health hospital, for many, many years, some of them, and they could move out if there was appropriate housing. So we have put in $2.5 million to develop 20 transitional housing beds so that people who've lived at the hospital can move out into a community. And we provided money for sort of a wraparound services for those families. We did hold, we held 3 public hearings where we had a wide range of public input. We had a hearing in Laconia, we had a hearing in Milford, and we had a hearing in Concord, where we received a lot of public testimony about our budget and about the kinds of things that people felt we needed to include in our budget. We also provided the Division of Children, Youth, and Families with 27 additional workers for child protection. Had hoped to do more. I'm sorry, I said 27, that's 31. We have provided them with 31 additional workers. And we also provided the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, we also provided them with the funding to get ready for a new program called Families First. So if a state does certain programs and are prepared to work with families in a new way of trying to prevent child abuse and neglect before it ever happens, if we can meet the standards that the federal government sets, it's called Families First, we will be eligible for our programs to be 50% funded with federal funds and 50% funded with state funds. So we felt that was it was a good investment to get our Department of Children, Youth, and Families up to a higher standard. So actually we put in another $7 million to do the work that gets us ready to be able to receive those federal funds and to be certified. So those were some of the things we did. We're hoping that the Senate will like some of them and that they will decide to keep some of them in their budget. And I'll just open up for questions.
I'm wondering about homelessness and where that falls into the budget.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, because actually one of the things that we were really struck by was how much homelessness is affecting so many of our issues: mental health, substance abuse, child protection. Homelessness is often at the core of the problem. And so we did a number of things in the area of housing. And let me see, I've got my papers here. That's what you see flying there in front of the screen. Let me tell you what some of them were. One of the ones that I was really, really impressed with, that we were told about, and we have put $2 million into this program. It is eviction prevention. So it was explained to us, and I guess it's something I know, but just hadn't thought a lot about, that once a family or a person is evicted, it is very expensive to rehouse them, to help them find housing, because they have, you know, all the problems. They have to have a security deposit. They have to have the first month's rent. You know, it's not unusual in New Hampshire for someone to be looking, when you, in a situation like that, needing maybe as much as a couple of $1,000s. And so if you can prevent the eviction, preventing eviction is one of the best ways of keeping people in their homes and not have homelessness. So we did put money into the eviction prevention. We also put additional funding into, where's the housing part? Oh, a program called Rapid Rehousing Program. This is a program to help people get into housing as quickly as possible before they end up in a spiral and end up in a shelter, or end up living in a car or on the street. We also put in money into homeless youth. There's a growing number of homeless youth in New Hampshire, and so we put $400,000 for a homeless youth outreach program into the budget. So those are some of the housing things, and we put $5 million into the Affordable Housing Fund. So we did think housing was a very, very important issue that definitely needed to be addressed.
Thank you.
I may have missed this because I had to leave a couple times, but did you talk about money appropriated for immigrants or immigration or anything like that?
There are a number of services that New Hampshire does have available. Most of that money, I believe, comes through the federal government, and comes through for our refugees. That we did not add any additional funds in that area, but a lot of people would be eligible for some of the programs that we did add additional funds for. I hear somebody, but I can't quite hear what they're saying.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I'm interested in hearing your perspective about the Senate. Like, how are they different from the House in terms of budget issues?
Well, they're much smaller. I mean, we had, just on the Finance Committee in the House alone, we had 22 people, so we're almost as large as the full Senate. So, you know, it's fewer people. It's probably somewhat easier for them to come together around some agreements, because fewer people to work with. I mean, as Amanda will tell you, our caucus alone, just the Democratic caucus, is 233 people. So whenever you can find 233 people who can agree on something, that's a pretty amazing. Whereas I think in the Senate, it's easier for them to sort of come together and work on things and come to an agreement with each other. It is different in that they're sort of the middle. So the governor, the House has done its part, and the Senate now has it. There, you know, there's the governor, then there's the House, then there's the Senate, and then there's the governor again, of course, because he has the right to either sign it or veto it. So the Senate is sort of in a position of actually getting an overview of what everybody has done. And they can I think they can kind of tell what's going to work and what isn't. They probably have a better feel. They probably have a better feel for what's going to be palatable to the governor, because the governor as you probably have seen in the newspapers, or maybe you've heard on TV, the governor has reacted to the House budget. So the Senate now has some feeling for whether or not what parts of the House budget the governor likes and what parts he doesn't like. So they kind of know where they might be going. It is a different dynamic. I will say that the House, because there are so many of us working on it, I think we do a pretty deep dive into it, because like I said, we do go pretty much page by page through the budget. The Senate is only, on the budget committee, is only 6 people. So it's almost, they can't possibly do that kind of a deep look into the budget. So I think they kind of depend on the House to have done some of that work for them.
Maybe you could clarify, does the Senate start with the governor's budget, or do they take the House's budget and
They start with the House budget. They start with the House budget. So that's what they're working from. And when we went over on Monday, the House Finance Committee, we went over to the Senate and the Senate Finance Committee, and we walked through what we had done with the budget. So they'll use that document. And the legislative budget assistant, who are the people who actually help us put the budget together, they're the staff people, they're accountants. They actually do a document for us that compares, I have it right here in front of me, it compares the House budget to what the governor gave us. So the Senate can see every change that we made to the House budget, to the governor's budget, I'm sorry. Every change the House made to the governor's budget. So the Senate can see all the changes. It's a fairly sizable document. It's probably 25 or 30 pages long. And like I said, we made about 297 changes, plus the 35 changes that the department and the governor himself asked us to make. So, but the Senate has all that material, so they have a lot to work with, and they do work from our budget.
I just have one thought. When you were talking about the groupings of like education being with transportation and so forth, why isn't it with human services? Why cannot education be with human services? And
well, our budget, actually, I can tell you a little bit about that. So our budget is actually about almost 50%. Almost 50%. Here it is. Okay. Health and Human Services is 50.5% of the total budget. So the people on Division 3 who do Health and Human Services, though they only have one department, it's still half of the budget. So in dividing up dividing up the budget into pieces, education, and for some reason over time those have just broken out to be education, transportation, fish and game, and safety have been one division. And then all the other agencies, and there's 32, Division 1 has 32 different agencies. It's, like I said, it's everything from corrections to judicial to very, very small agencies. So they have 32 they have a lot of agencies, but no one has very much money. Health and Human Services has 50% of the budget. So that they have a division all of their own, just because it's such a big piece of the budget.
thank you.
I should point out that you all in finance here, you get the presentations. I mean, when you look at the calendar, it says each agency's got their own time with you. And
Right.
I think that's important to acknowledge as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we go through the budgets, and department people are there with us, as well as advocates. A lot of, if someone asks about housing, well, there are a lot of housing advocates. So they're usually, on the days that we're talking about housing, they're usually in the room also.
Mhm.
So it's not just the departments, but it's also advocacy groups are there representing their clients. And then we do have public hearings, and often the public will there are members of the public who come to the finance committee and be there during our work sessions, our deliberation.
Is there any other questions? Yeah, I find this a fascinating topic.
Amanda, I think Amanda's getting ready to be on the finance committee.
Oh gosh, no. Actually, Mary Jane, I have a question that has nothing really to do, but do you remember the number for the capital gains tax bill?
Oh, you mean the actual number?
Because there was
I
a
think
House Bill 6, I think 40.
586,
Okay.
or I think it's 586.
Because there was a 686 that was retained in committee, but I had a constituent ask me about it today, so I wanted to get back to her, and I couldn't remember which one it was.
Let me see. Well, we did retain. We do have that bill. We retained it in our committee.
Okay.
We retained it in finance, and we rolled it into the budget.
That's
So
what I
the
thought.
words-
Okay.
Yeah. And I can't remember if it's 686 or 586.
It's 686, so it was rolled
Okay.
into the budget.
It's
That's what I
rolled
had
into the budget.
explained. Okay.
It's part of the budget. That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any other burning questions about the budget or how it affects you or any other topics that we want to discuss tonight?
All set, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank
that
you.
was good. I hope it was helpful. And anytime you have questions, I know that there are other members of the finance committee would be more than willing to answer, and you can always get in touch with me. So thank you very much.
Thank
Great
you.
talking to you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well,
So I'm
you
just
all
gonna-
have- yeah, you all can get off. I'll end the meeting and you all have a great
Okay.
night.
Okay.
you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Nice
Bye.
talking to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.